Last Tuesday morning, I had the opportunity to join many of my colleagues from the South Dakota Synod in a time of worship, where we got to hear a seminary president, preaching professor, author. He wrote that in the sense of the gospel we studied last winter. Biblical commentator and scholar preach on this very text that we have in our gospel from Matthew. Much to our surprise, he stood up, looked at us, and said, "This is a hard parable. And really, I have no idea what it actually means. But I can tell you this. We're dealing with power and authority here, and it's worth talking about." When he said that, I'm pretty sure we all could breathe a little bit more easily, just knowing that he struggles with text just as much as we do. In a way, it was like having someone that we consider an authority on preaching still had questions, and he was still learning himself, and that made us feel better. Well, he was right. In our gospel text today, and for really much of Matthew's gospel, we hear Jesus' authority being questioned. We are moving closer and closer to what we call Good Friday here in this particular text. Jesus has already triumphantly entered Jerusalem. He's violently cleansed the temple and cursed the fig tree. And now here he is meandering back into the temple preaching and teaching. He's back to the elders and the chief priests' turf. So they've got him. He's been causing problems, riling people up, and all by whose authority? Theirs? The men who had control over so much of the lives of the Jewish people in Jerusalem? No. To them, he was just a troublemaker, and his authority couldn't have come from them at all. It didn't. So therefore, he had no right to be doing this preaching and teaching and causing general mischief in their town. And so they ask, where did his authority come from? Well, Jesus, being quick-witted and rather stealthy himself, asks a question back. One that can either make these authorities admit that they were being hypocrites, or make the crowds who had once followed John the Baptizer very angry. Where did John's authority to baptize come from? From God or from people? If from God, then they should be dropping their ways and following Jesus, because John and Jesus are so closely linked in baptism. If they claim that it's just from human origin, well, then they better get ready for some angry people coming at them with stones. The crowds believed so much in Jesus and in John that to say anything against them was unacceptable to those crowds. In this counterattack of words, Jesus, who starts as the trapped one, does the trapping. The chief priests and the elders don't want to answer, because neither way they could answer would help them maintain their own authority amongst the people of Jerusalem. So they give a cop-out answer. We don't know. To which Jesus responds with our parable. A dad asks the son to go work in his vineyard. The son says no, but he goes back later and does the work. He asks his other son, after the first son says no, and the second son says he'll do it, but he never does. Who does the Father's will? Well, the chief priests and the elders say first. But what they don't really get is that that's likely the response that Jesus was looking for. And it's the one that would end up making them look bad. Tax collectors, prostitutes, sinners, they are the ones put down by the chief priest's authority. And yet they are the first Jesus reaches out a hand of invitation to. The chief priests and the elders aren't condemned, you see, but they are God's children too. That's why they're not condemned. But they have a different way of thinking about authority and who has a place in God's kingdom. And so we encounter this issue of authority too, for us. In in our lives and in our world, who holds authority? That's the question that our conference speaker gave to us in his sermon. And it's the one that I hand to you to consider today and to this week. If we think deeply about authority, we see that it is often given. It doesn't just exist. People from a higher ranking either give someone or some group authority. Or in other cases, those from a lower rank in society, for good or bad, must accept the authority of a person or group. So, authority is given by someone who has authorized it, who was asked by an author to do so, or a leader who has actual power. That might be kind of a conflated way of thinking about it, but much of authority is indeed given. And there are some ways that we encounter authority that may not be traditional ways of thinking about it, but they impact us all the time. One might be this, especially if you're a parent or a child. You're reprimanding your child. They're in trouble, they've done something wrong. Then they break in as you're giving them this lecture and they say, "You're making me feel bad." To which you, as the parent, respond with, "I'm not trying to make you feel anything." You're simply trying to make your child understand the seriousness of whatever they did. Your child, you say, can decide whether or not you're actually hurting their feelings, or they can decide to accept their consequences for whatever they are and not put any emotion or feeling into it, which we know isn't easy. Or it could look like this in the workplace. A coworker keeps putting pressure on you to do more and more of their workload. They're exercising power over you, be it through some kind of blackmail or manipulation, whatever. But shrinking away from them, cowering before them in obedience, is giving them authority over you that they have no reason or right to have. Or lastly, and this is a harder one for many people to talk about, maybe you've survived years of abuse and escaped from that abuse, but the after effects make you feel like the shell of the person that you once knew yourself to be. In that way, whoever your abuser was is still holding some kind of mental, emotional, psychological authority over you. These things, whether they're maybe minor, getting lectured by a parent, or catastrophic, they all matter. And even if they seem minor, they can impact us and change us in ways that hurt our lives later on, or even in our present. Somehow those events or those people have been given authority in our lives. So we, as our conference speaker put it, may have been victimized in situations, but we do not have to be victims. This may not be a direct connection to our parable, but it helps us to think about our present and our future and authority. The God who has claimed us in our baptism invites us to look beyond our past and those things or persons that we have given authority to, and to show us that there is a different future, one that's not defined by the laws of the chief priests and the elders, or by the rude person who made you feel stupid in the grocery store, whose words are just irking at you and bugging you all day after the fact. Rather, those who might be so often considered victims, sinners, or second-class citizens have been invited to the table where all may be fed, and where all have been accepted and claimed as God's sons and daughters, and brought to what we may call an open future. It's Christ, the one whose name is above all names, who emptied himself, became like us, took on the form of a slave, who was exalted high on the cross so that we may be freed. He has opened the way and shown the way to that future, whatever it looks like. He has shaped that identity that we all have as children of God. It is God and Jesus Christ who is the author of our lives and our faith, whose authority covers all things, events, and people, that we have let have authority over our lives, our hopes, our self-confidence, our self-worth, and our sense of belonging in this world. It is God who walks with us and helps us work through all of that pain. That week, Jesus physically and metaphorically turned over the tables in that temple. He showed the elders and the chief priests that just maybe how they thought about God and the world and humanity needed to be recast. It was seemingly this war of words, but it was really a reminder that all authority rests in God and not in the way humanity likes to put our world in little boxes, or especially in the hands of those who seek to do us harm. Those things that we let have authority, those things that hurt us, that try to take the place of our loving and gracious God, those things can and need to be handed over to God daily, because God doesn't want us to hold those burdens anymore. So this day, this week, this year, I invite you, I encourage you to give those things to God in whatever way you need to. Seek to unburden yourselves from them. Don't let them have authority anymore, which trying to do is harder than we could probably ever imagine, really. But we can do it because we know that God in Jesus Christ, the author of our faith and life, holds an authority that nothing else can. And because we know that he has experienced and knows our own sufferings and takes them from us on the cross. Like the first son in our parable today, things can get turned around and there can be a new start. We are invited to God's table and have a place in God's kingdom. Not because we have authority or because any one person with authority has told us to come, but because God in Jesus Christ meets us there, meets us wherever we are and loves us, just as we are, sin, scars, and all, as we seek to live into the future that speaks grace, hope, and love, and the chance to lift our souls in praise to God, and not dwell in the words or feelings of conditional love, bullying, and victimization that too many of our past experiences have tried to speak into our lives.